This cold night. Not really too cold by New Hampshire standards. And the people upstairs who gave us an overflow room. Thank you. This is quite a gig. Whoa. Look, every time you have an election, people tell you it's important. But if it's a directional election, it is important. Very often, the winner of an election is determined by what people decide it's about. And it seems to me clear, if you look at where America is today, we went through that terrible crash in late 2008. We have come out of it in a sense that the growth number of jobs that were lost have been replaced. We avoided falling into a depression. We put in new protections against a financial crash in the future. We have made some real exciting progress in dealing with the challenge of climate change in a way that creates more jobs and clean energy. But we still haven't gotten the incomes back. We still don't have broad-based prosperity again. And it is, I would argue, the major challenge facing the country and the next president. If everyone has a job and something to look forward to in the morning, it reduces the tensions and increases the hope in a country. It makes people more secure and less likely to disintegrate our community into separate groups of resentment. I see all these movements today that I like. I like all those young people in Black Lives Matter. I think what they're saying is important. When you see an unarmed young person get 17 bullets in one of our cities, and another mentally ill man who should never had the gun that was in his hand running away from the police and have 32 bullets fired at him. And then you see the heroic performance of the police officers in the aftermath of the tragedy at San Bernardino. You know we have to do something to pull it back together. I feel the same way about all the young immigrant dreamers who want to pursue their education here. I feel the same way about the progress that South Carolina made when they took the Confederate flag down after a speech by a Republican woman, 4 minutes long, who was the direct descendant of the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. She said essentially, guys, if I want to take it down, we should take it down. You know it's the right thing to do. Now, why am I saying this? Because to have broad-based prosperity, you have to have inclusive economics and more equal opportunities for people to take advantage of it. And to make it work, you have to have inclusive societies where we relish our differences, but where when the chips are down, our common humanity matters more. I was really proud of Hillary for being the first candidate, for example, to propose a comprehensive plan to help all those coal communities make a transition into a new economy. Those folks haven't been voting for us much lately. And she basically said, I don't care, you're Americans, you deserve a chance. So when there is discrimination against African Americans or Hispanics or Muslims just because of who they are, I don't like that. But we never can forget that what we have to do is unite the police and the community. unite business and labor, unite this country. That's when things happen, when you have inclusive economics and inclusive societies. And in order to do that, you have to have more inclusive politics. So the big job of the next president is to give us those things: inclusive economics, inclusive societies, inclusive politics, and to defend the national security of the country in a way that preserves our values, that keeps big bad things from happening, and wages the battle we must in billions of minds through the social media throughout the world for what kind of world we're going to live in. A world where what we have in common counts more, or where our differences count more. A world where we just get all atomized and hunkered down in our bunkers, or where we still got our hands outstretched. That's what I think the election's about. If you decide that, then you have to ask, well, who's the best person to do that job? Well, and here's why I think that. I think at first because she spent a lot of time traveling this country and listening to people, just like she did when she was a senator from New York, or traveling the world when she was Secretary of State. And she has a good economic plan. It says, okay, we got to cut our greenhouse gas emissions because we don't want to burn up the planet for our kids and grandkids. How in the wide world could you create more new businesses and more good jobs than by changing the way you produce and consume energy and other local resources? It's the greatest opportunity our country has ever had. Today, this is not some pie in the sky deal. Today, Iowa, Minnesota, and the oil capital of the country, Texas, get 25 to 30% of their base load electricity from wind today. And it is an enormous competitive advantage for them. The kilowatt hour cost of electricity in Iowa is about 5.8 cents. It's 13.9 in New York. That's the highest in the country. Our neighbors in the Caribbean, a great source of future opportunity for us and for them, before the collapse in oil prices, were paying 36 to 50 cents because it was all imported, heavy, polluting oil. We need a modern infrastructure. There are too many of our fellow Americans who live in places that are small towns and rural areas who could make more money and generate more customers if they had access to rapid broadband. But nationally, South Korea's speed averaged 3 to 4 times ours. Building that infrastructure counts, along with the roads, the bridges, the rails, and all of the rest. We've got to make sure that more people have opportunities to do this, including the opportunity to start a job, start a business. I like the Dodd-Frank bill, and Hillary's proposed some things to strengthen it so that very large financial institutions that are tempted to generate more money for those at the top by trading with each other instead of investing in America's future can't take undue risks. But we also have to make sure that if a bank wants to make a loan to a small business, that the cost of that transaction is not so high they won't loan $100,000 for somebody to start a new business. We've got to have a small business set of rules that make sense. You know, I grew up in Arkansas, and I was governor there, and there's a lot of difference between the amount of cash you need to protect against financial speculation that has no impact on the real economy, except if it goes bad and can crash, and how much you need to make a decision that a farmer you've known for 25 years, whose John Deere tractor breaks down right before you've got to plant the crop, needs a loan for a new tractor. Or whether someone you know here in Exeter who wants to open a little restaurant or a hardware store or a frame shop can get the loan necessary to do it. And it's crazy for a bank to say, we're not making loans of that size anymore because it costs us too much to make them. We have to have a sense of what makes this economy go. If you want to raise wages and reduce income inequality, you have got, yes, to raise the minimum wage, but you also have to create more jobs and more businesses in areas that have a good growth projection. We can do that. Her plan does. The other thing we have to do is make sure that we're taking care of the workforce. And some people, and the other party I might add, have made somewhat disparaging comments about Hillary's proposals on things like equal pay, paid family leave, universal access to pre-K or quality child care. But look, here are the rules. In every relatively wealthy country, the richer you get and the longer you stay wealthy, the smaller the family size. That holds across all societies without regard to culture and religion. Now, we made up for it always before by being at the top of the world in small business formation and always in the top 10 in the percentage of women in the workforce. When I left office, we were 7th, in spite of the fact that we were one of only 7 countries that didn't have paid family leave. Today, we're not even in the top 20 for women in the workforce. So when Hillary comes out for equal pay and paid family leave and access to quality child care and pre-kindergarten, that's an economic strategy. You have to keep young people coming into the workforce. Having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters. It is a large determinant of the future of the country. The other thing we got to do is to recognize that in the aftermath of the crash, states, even those not governed by people who don't favor funding for education, have basically underfunded higher education in a film of limited funds to keep funding the schools. It was like a Hobson's choice that they had no choice to make. You couldn't raise taxes as bad as the economy was, and you had to take care of the kids coming up. But as a result, college debt has spiraled, and it has in New Hampshire. The average debt here is something like $30,000, which is far higher than the average debt. And if that means that a bunch of people are going out in the world with $100,000 worth of debt or more in jobs where they cannot sustain it. I talked to a man the other day who is a New York small business person who has an assistant that he was paying, I think, $110,000, which was a good, given the size of the business and everything, that was a nice salary. But after taxes, it's about $70,000, and the woman's monthly payment on her college loan was $2,900 a month. So you do the math. And then ask yourself if you could live in Manhattan on the rest, or Brooklyn or the Bronx. This story's being repeated everywhere. So Hillary's got a plan to deal with that, to lower the interest rates, allow people to refinance, and then work to a system where everybody who borrows money to go to college from any source should be able to pay it back as a fixed percentage of their income, so nobody is ever denied the right to go to college. So, it's a good program. On the question of building a more united society, there's really not much more important than preserving and continue to improve this health care law. The Congress is about to vote again to defund the health care law. And tell everybody what a terrible failure it is. Let me tell you, we got 90% of our people insured for the first time. We were down, headed straight to 80. If the 22 states that still haven't taken Medicaid would do it, we'd be up almost at 95. We had 4 years of the lowest medical inflation in history. It is true last year we had a little bump in cost of premiums, but that's because all the people who joined the health exchange, by and large, were older people and the older we are, the more healthcare dollars we consume. This year, yesterday, it was in the paper, this year, 2.4 million more people, new people, have entered those health exchanges. They are overwhelmingly younger, healthier people who are going to now help us build a system that will hold premiums down and continue to universalize access to health care. I don't know about you, but I think it would be a real mistake to give in to the attempts to weaken, water down, or repeal this health care law. We ought to do what Hillary says and continue to improve it. I'm very proud of the work that she's done for years on Alzheimer's, on autism, and on mental health in general. Our policies say there should be parity for mental health treatment, but you and I know it doesn't exist. And when Dan was introducing me and he said what he did about access to guns, I just want to point out that one of the problems with the current law is that we don't have good record keeping for all mental health incidences. And there are some places where people would have gotten mental health if it were available. And so the background check law as it currently works is not always effective. And I think if more gun owners, already 85% of them support universal background checks, but if they knew more about what the shortcomings in the mental health system were, they'd be willing to wait another day or two to buy a gun to ensure that you didn't have people like that poor guy running down the street in Los Angeles holding a gun that he had no more business than a man in the moon having. And so that all matters. But the biggest problem we got right now is this opium and heroin problem. It's a problem in New Hampshire. And it fits with the general problems of small town and rural America, interestingly enough. You know what state has the highest percentage of its population subject to overdoses? West Virginia. Because in all those small towns and rural areas where the coal jobs have been going down for decades, people get up every day and they look in the mirror and they think every single day it's going to be just like yesterday. A lot of those people are dying of a broken heart. For the first time in my lifetime, the life expectancy of non-college educated, middle-aged white Americans is going down. It's never happened in my life. We have got to do something about this. And this is one area where I'm very hopeful for bipartisan progress. Most people, without regard to party, understand that this is a public health problem, not a law enforcement problem. That in the last 4 years, I have lost 3 children of 3 friends of mine who all had the same story. Well, one was at home, the other 2 went out. They drank 3 or 4 beers, and then their partner said, well, why don't you pop this pill, it'll give you a buzz. It does give you a buzz. But if you fall asleep, it kills a part of your brain for a while that tells your body to breathe while you're sleeping. So in addition to the people that are addicted, we have lots of people die every year because they don't understand the basic biochemistry of what is going on. I applaud Governor Hotham for the work that she's done to make naloxone, I think you call it Narcan, it's more available. Our foundation worked hard to get the FDA to approve a nasal spray version of it. It saves about $40 a dose. And we're trying to get it out all over the country. But this is a huge problem. And the next president ought to know the kind of problems that keep Americans up at night. Hillary does, because she took those listening tours and because she had to come up with policies and figured out how to pay for them. That's a very big deal. We have got to figure out how to come back together again. And I just want to say this about the fear we all have after Paris and what happened in San Bernardino. Look, it was tragic. But a couple of days after the San Bernardino tragedy, I picked up the New York Daily News one day. And I thumbing through it, and there's this little article about a Yemeni immigrant who came here in 2002, leaving his wife and 4 children home in Yemen and sending money home every month, trying for more than 12 years to bring them over here. He's working at a little quick stop store in New York. 2 robbers come in with pistols, tell him to get the cash register open, clean it out, and give him the money. He opens the cash register, grabs the money, and just as he's about to give it to him, according to the article, he said, "You know, I've only had this job over a year. This is not my money, and it's certainly not their money." And he slapped at the gunman's hand who was standing closest to him. The gun goes off, misses him by a few inches, bullet goes in the counter, and thank goodness for him, the robbers weren't total idiots. They realized they had just fired a gun in downtown Manhattan in the middle of the day, or in one of the boroughs, and they go run away. So he goes next door, uses the phone, calls the police, goes back, secures the cash register, and waits, makes his police report. Meanwhile, the guy that owns the store is over the moon that he did it, and gives him the afternoon off. And he went home, took out his prayer rug, and gave thanks for his survival, and said a prayer that maybe finally his wife and 4 children, now 15, 17, 19, and 21, might be able to join him. He is far more representative of the Muslim community in America than those people in San Bernardino. And so, I think her plan on this is really important. We cannot do this. And heroin's now cheaper than OxyContin and Vicodin because it's being grown in the Sierra Madre in Mexico, and the poppies are being harvested by preteens. We have got to do something about this. Which brings me to the third thing. We got to have inclusive politics. We actually have to get the show on the road. Or as Hillary said, I'm a progressive, but I'm one who likes to get things done. And let me just start with this. The next president will make between 1 and 3 appointments to the United States Supreme Court. I think it's important he makes those appointments. But I think she's proved she knows how to get things done. When she was Secretary of State, she spearheaded the development of the Iran sanctions and got China and Russia to sign off on them. I didn't think she could do that. And she worked with the then Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt to stop a full-scale shooting war between Hamas and Israel in Gaza. And she worked with Republican senators to ratify a treaty her team developed called the New START Treaty, which is the only thing that survives our attempts to do better with Russia. They are honoring that treaty. And I think it's a good thing in a dangerous world that we reduced the chances of a nuclear exchange between ourselves and the Russians. These are important things. When Hillary was a senator, she was on a commission to study the future of the American military that the Pentagon asked her to be on. Newt Gingrich was on the commission. And I had occasion to talk to him. He went out of his way to tell me how good she was. Of course, that was before the campaign started. If you nominate her, you'll be treated to a lot of things the Republicans said before she started running. But anyway, she knows how to do things. She knows we've got to do something about this black money in politics, uncovered secret money. This is wrong. The Supreme Court said that we cannot limit the amount of money people can spend on campaigns. I think it was a bad decision, but they said that. They did not say that we had to let people give money in an undisclosed way and sneak around when they try to change the whole future of politics nationally or in New Hampshire. We've got to keep working for that. And now, I want to just say one thing about this election. Again, you just have to decide whether you want inclusive economics, inclusive social policies, inclusive politics. And whether you want someone who actually knows how to defend the country without giving away our values. How to build an economy for, in her words, the struggling, the striving, and the successful. And whether you think that ought to be the model. To do it, you need a change maker. And so I'll just close with this and ask you to think about it. And I'll say in advance, you're entitled to say, what else is he going to say? They just celebrated their 40th anniversary. But you're entitled to discount it, but I do know her. When we met in law school, it was relatively rare for women to be at Yale Law School or in law school generally. It's hard to believe now most graduates are women from law schools. She could have gone anywhere. Her interest in law school was legal services for poor people. When she got out, instead of taking a clerkship or big firm job, she went to work for the Children's Defense Fund. She went to Alabama to investigate whether segregated academies were claiming tax exemptions under the grounds that they were just private academies that happened to have no African Americans in them. And they changed the law, and the schools eventually changed the practice. She went to South Carolina, this is more important to me now, to investigate why so many 14 and 15-year-old children, all of whom were African American, were in adult jails. Not so much of that anymore. Everywhere she went, she made something good happen. When she came home to Arkansas to be with me, she opened the first legal aid clinic we'd ever had, and where the university is. And I'll never forget, she made me take her to court the day the judge accepted the legal aid proposal, because he was a crusty old guy who liked the old system of just appointing lawyers. And so help me, the guy sitting on the bench, and I introduced him and everything, and he was polite but stern. And then he calls the court to order, and she makes her presentation, and he leans over and he said, you know, I don't like legal aid very much. And I don't like lady lawyers very much. I apologize to young people used to talk like that. Within 6 months, he changed his position on both. She made something good happen, and it's still thriving up there. And then when I became governor, she came in one day and said, you know, Bill, we've got all these really poor families in Arkansas who don't have any education, and their kids are starting school so far behind. And I found a program that was put in place in Israel for immigrants that didn't speak Hebrew or English called HIPPY, Home Instruction Program for Preschool Youngsters. I said, what does it do? It said, it teaches the parents to be their kids' first teachers and gets them involved in the whole educational enterprise. And I think it would work here. And I said, well, so what are we going to do about it? She said, oh, don't worry. She said, I just talked to the woman who founded it, and she's going to be here in about 10 days, and we're going to set it up. She hadn't been elected to anything yet. Next thing I know, we got a whole program going. Before you know it, it was in 26 states. There was a national organization. And today, before there was ever child care standards or big preschool, there were these thousands and thousands and thousands of kids that came from these poor families who got a better start in life over the last 30 years because she makes something good happen wherever she is, whatever she's doing, she just makes things happen. And when we had to redo our school standards, a national expert said Arkansas had the worst schools in America. And I took office in 1983. So I put her in charge of this committee to offer upgraded standards. Smaller classes in the early grades, the first state to require elementary counselors, a lot of other things. A lot more science and math and all that. But anyway, 9 years later, I came to New Hampshire. running for president. The same guy that said we had the worst schools in America in 1983, he had said we had one of the two most improved school systems in the entire country, and I used it in speeches here to try to talk you into voting for me, but she did that. And she had never been elected anything. And so then we go to Washington and we try to do health care. We offered a bill, which people now forget was widely acclaimed by the experts and took 1,400 pages more out of federal law than it put in. We just didn't have 60 votes in the Senate. And she didn't give up. So when we passed the balanced budget bill, she worked with Senator Kennedy to put the Children's Health Insurance Program in it. There are 12 million kids in that program today. There were 6 million when I left office. It was the largest expansion of health care from the time Medicaid and Medicare passed until Obamacare passed. And she just did it. Then she came to me one day, and I thought, this is never going to happen. She came to me and said, Bill, I have finally found something we can work with Tom DeLay on. Now, a lot of you younger people may not remember him, but he was sort of Newt Gingrich's enforcer in the pre-Tea Party Congress. And to put it mildly, he didn't think much of me. But I said, you got to be kidding. She said, no, he's an adoptive parent. And we had a terrible problem with too many kids in permanent foster homes, not enough kids moving to adoptive homes, kids aging out of foster care with nowhere to go, nothing to do, no education, no continuing support. And she and Tom DeLay got together, and I was one of the happiest bill signings I ever did, was signing the bill they agreed on. And by the time I left office, it had already increased adoptions out of foster care by 65% before I even left office. And she hadn't been elected anything. Then when she started to run for the Senate in New York, she'd come home just full of ideas every day. And after she got elected, she got all these predominantly Republican farmers on Long Island involved in doing things to preserve the farms there at a time when the real estate's pretty high. And pretty soon there'll be several of them in Iowa knocking on doors saying, you know, I'm a Republican, but she's the only person who ever did anything for us. Wine growers in upstate New York selling their wine in restaurants for the first time. A guy making fishing rods in a little town in upstate New York, introduced to e-commerce, quadrupled his business, and all his new customers were in Norway. It never even occurred to him. She just makes something happen. Just put her someplace, and 2 or 3 days later, something good will be going on. And she left office, came to work in our foundation. All of a sudden, we had a project called No Ceilings, which pointed out all the places where gender disparity still exists. Another project called Too Small to Fail, which educated parents about what they could do for their children, whether or not they had any money before they went to school. She just makes things happen. We need a change maker. I spent a lot of time when I was president obsessing with restoring broad-based prosperity. Someone asked me when I celebrated the 10th anniversary of my library about 15 months ago, what I was most proud of. I said, I'm most proud of broad-based prosperity. We had 40 or 50% more jobs than were created when President Reagan was in office. That's the only time trickle-down economics ever looked like it was working, because we never had gone on a sugar high before where we basically cut taxes and increased spending so dramatically at the same time. Incomes dropped for everybody during the 2 Bush administrations. But we had 100 times as many people move from poverty into the middle class. They worked their way there. And we can do that again. The people in the middle earn 50% more they're increased. People just below the middle, the next quintile, more than twice as much big an increase. In the bottom, incomes increased for the bottom 20% of workers 0.7% in the 8 years of President Reagan's office, 23.6% when I was there. And the rest did just fine. The rest did just fine. Why am I telling you this? Forget about that. I'm just telling you that we can do this. There is no country better positioned than the United States for the future. We can do it. But you got to have somebody who makes good things happen. We can also navigate this very uncertain and often perilous world without blowing it up or blowing our values up. But you got to have somebody who knows how to stop big bad things from happening and make good things happen. In my adult lifetime, there has never been anyone better prepared for the job that awaits the next president than Hillary. Never. And so, and she's pretty much still the same girl I fell in love with in law school. She really is. And that's why she's still really close friends with her best friend from grade school. And why all these people she went to high school with are coming to New Hampshire or Iowa. And why people she met more than 30 years ago in Arkansas keep coming to New Hampshire every time she's on the ballot. There are candidates and then there are candidates. There are records and then there are records. All I can tell you is, in our family, here's how we keep score. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? Do children have a brighter future? And are things coming together instead of being torn apart? If that's going to be your scorekeeping, you only have one choice, and I hope you'll help her win in New Hampshire. Thank you.